Imagine standing at the edge of a lake so deep that if you dropped the Eiffel Tower to its bottom, the tower would vanish completely beneath the surface, swallowed by water darker than midnight. Now imagine what might be living down there, in that cold, crushing darkness where sunlight has never reached, where the weight of water above presses down with a force that would flatten most living things into nothing. Welcome to Bedtime Biology, where science meets serenity. Each night, we explore the quiet wonders of the natural world, calming your mind and sparking your curiosity. If you like these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and commenting below if you have any feedback or suggestions for topics of future episodes. Tonight, we're diving beneath the surface of Earth's deepest lakes, into worlds that most people will never see. These aren't just deep holes filled with water. They're ancient time capsules, evolutionary laboratories, and sanctuaries for creatures found nowhere else on Earth. Some of these lakes have been isolated for millions of years, giving life the chance to evolve in directions impossible anywhere else. Others lie sealed beneath kilometers of ice, harboring mysteries we're only beginning to understand. In the depths of these lakes, where pressure builds and light fades to nothing, life has found ways not just to survive, but to thrive in forms both strange and beautiful. From Siberia's frozen heart to Africa's Great Rift Valley, from beneath Antarctica's ice sheet to the collapsed crater of an ancient volcano, we'll travel to places where the very definition of life gets tested and rewritten. We'll meet seals that have forgotten the ocean, fish as transparent as glass, creatures that glow in eternal darkness, and microbes that might hold clues to life on other worlds. Each lake tells a different story, but together they reveal something profound about the tenacity and creativity of life itself. So, settle in, let the day's noise fade away, and join me as we descend into some of the most remote and extraordinary ecosystems on our planet. The deepest lake in the world sits in the heart of Siberia, cradled between mountain ranges in a rift valley that's still slowly tearing the Earth's crust apart. Lake Baikal plunges down 1,642 meters at its deepest point, making it not just the deepest lake on Earth, but also the oldest, having existed for somewhere between 25 and 30 million years. It's so vast and so deep that it contains more water than all 5 of North America's Great Lakes combined, roughly 20 to 23% of all the unfrozen fresh water on the planet's surface. In winter, the surface freezes into ice thick enough to drive trucks across. But below that frozen ceiling, the water stays liquid all the way down, kept from freezing by the sheer volume and depth of the lake. But what makes Baikal truly extraordinary isn't just its size or age. It's what lives in those depths, a collection of creatures so unique that more than 2/3 of the species found in the lake exist nowhere else in the world. Over tens of millions of years, isolated from other bodies of water by mountains and distance, life in Baikal evolved along its own peculiar paths, creating an underwater world unlike any other. Among the most remarkable residents of Lake Baikal is the Baikal seal, known locally as the nerpa. It's one of only 3 species of freshwater seals in the world, and the only one that lives its entire life in fresh water without any connection to the ocean. These seals are small for their kind, measuring about 165 centimeters long and weighing up to 130 kilograms, with females typically larger than males due to a thick layer of subcutaneous fat that helps them survive the lake's frigid temperatures. Their fur ranges from silver grey to dark brown on the back, lightening to yellowish white on the belly. And they have large, dark eyes adapted for seeing in the dim light of deep water. How these seals ended up in a lake hundreds of kilometers from any ocean remains one of Baikal's enduring mysteries. The most widely accepted theory suggests they migrated from the Arctic Ocean through ancient river systems during the Ice Age, following what are now the Angara and Yenisei rivers, then became isolated when those connections changed or disappeared. However, no fossil evidence has yet confirmed this journey, leaving scientists to piece together the story from genetic studies and educated guesses. What we do know is that once they arrived, they adapted beautifully to their new home. Baikal seals are solitary creatures for most of the year, spreading out across the lake's vast expanse, sometimes living kilometers away from other seals. They concentrate more heavily in the northern parts of the lake, where winter ice persists longer, providing stable platforms for giving birth to pups. In winter, when the entire lake surface freezes over, each seal maintains several breathing holes in the ice, using their powerful claws to scrape away new ice that forms. These breathing holes become the center of each seal's territory, and they generally respect each other's spaces, not interfering with nearby seals' hunting grounds. When the ice begins to break up in spring, the seals tend to stay near the shoreline, hauling out on rocks to rest and warm themselves in whatever sun penetrates the cold Siberian air. The Nerpa are diving specialists, capable of descending to depths of 400 meters and remaining underwater for more than 40 minutes. They possess 2 liters more blood than other seals of similar size, an adaptation that allows them to hold their breath even longer when needed, up to 70 minutes if frightened or evading danger. Most dives last only 2 to 4 minutes, just long enough to hunt in the middle depths of the water column where their primary prey congregates. And that prey is something special in itself, a fish so unusual it seems to belong more to the realm of deep sea trenches than a freshwater lake. The golomyanka, or Baikal oilfish, is unlike almost any other fish you'll encounter. Its body is translucent, scaleless, and composed of up to 35 to 40% pure oil by weight, giving it an almost ghostly appearance in the rare moments when light touches it. There are 2 species, the big Baikal oilfish and the small Baikal oilfish, and together they represent the most abundant fish in all of Lake Baikal, making up an estimated 70% of the total fish population. The golomyanka's body is so laden with oil, and its bones so porous that it has almost perfect neutral buoyancy, allowing it to move effortlessly up and down through the entire water column without the need for a swim bladder, which most fish rely on to control their depth. This adaptation is crucial because it means the fish can handle extreme pressure changes that would rupture the swim bladders of ordinary fish. During the day, golomyanka typically stay deep, below 100 meters, and sometimes venturing all the way down to the lake bottom at depths approaching 1600 meters, making them among the deepest living freshwater fish in the world. At night, they rise toward the surface, sometimes coming as shallow as 10 to 25 meters below the ice or open water, where they feed on tiny planktonic crustaceans that also migrate up from the depths. Perhaps the most unusual feature of the golomyanka is their method of reproduction. Unlike almost all other fish, which lay eggs, golomyanka are viviparous, meaning they give birth to live young. a single female can produce between 2,000 and 3,000 larvae in one birth, and most females die shortly after this massive reproductive event, though not in the dramatic way folklore sometimes suggests. Old tales claimed their bellies would burst open to release the young, but this is a myth. They simply die of exhaustion after the enormous physiological toll of producing and birthing so many offspring. Some individuals can live up to 6 to 8 years, and females carrying developing embryos can be found year-round, though births peak from late summer through early spring. The Golomyanka have other strange features. Their eyes contain only rod cells and lack cone cells entirely, which makes them extraordinarily sensitive to very low light levels, but unable to see in colour. This makes sense for a fish spending much of its time in near total darkness. They also have a highly developed lateral line system running along their sides, a sensory organ that detects vibrations and movement in the water, allowing them to hunt effectively even when they can't see their prey. They feed primarily on tiny copepods called Episcura baikalensis, along with amphipod crustaceans and even the larvae of other fish, including their own young. And what prey the yas or Golomyanka don't consume ends up sustaining one of Baikal's most diverse and numerous groups of animals, the amphipods. Lake Baikal is home to more than 350 species of these small, shrimp-like crustaceans, and almost all of them are endemic, found nowhere else on Earth. They've undergone what scientists call adaptive radiation, rapidly diversifying into an incredible array of forms to fill different ecological niches in the lake. Some are barely visible without magnification, while others grow to sizes rarely seen in freshwater amphipods, with certain species of Acanthogomarus reaching body lengths of 7 centimeters. These amphipods have adapted to every possible habitat in the lake. Some live in the open water column, swimming freely like tiny marine species, which is highly unusual for freshwater amphipods. The pelagic amphipod Macrohectopus brunnichi spends its entire life in the water column, never touching the bottom, a lifestyle unique among freshwater crustaceans and more commonly seen in marine environments. Other species live on the lake bottom, burrowing into sediments or crawling among rocks, feeding on detritus and dead organic matter that drifts down from above. Some are herbivorous, grazing on algae, while others are carnivorous predators, hunting smaller invertebrates, or even parasitizing other amphipods. One remarkable feature of Baikal's amphipods is what scientists call gigantism, the tendency for deep water species to grow much larger than their shallow water relatives. This phenomenon has been linked to the lake's unusually high oxygen levels, which persist even at great depths. Most deep lakes experience oxygen depletion in their deepest waters because decomposition uses up oxygen faster than it can be replenished. But Baikal's water circulates in a way that keeps oxygen levels high throughout the entire water column, even at the very bottom. This abundant oxygen allows larger body sizes and higher metabolic rates than would otherwise be possible in the deep, cold water. The amphipods serve as a crucial link in Baikal's food web. They consume smaller organisms and detritus, then become food themselves for larger predators. The Baikal seal relies heavily on them, using specialized teeth that allow the seal to filter feed on amphipods when they swarm in large enough numbers. The Golomyanka fish also eat them in vast quantities. In winter and spring, amphipods and other small crustaceans make up more than 90% of the Nerpa's diet, and the seals consume an estimated 64,000 tons of golomyanka per year, more than half the annual biomass production of these strange oilfish. But Baikal's biodiversity doesn't stop with seals, oilfish, and amphipods. The lake harbours more than 30 species of sculpins, bottom-dwelling fish in the family Cotidae, and every single one of them is endemic. These sculpins have diversified into distinct families found only in Baikal: the deep water sculpins, the Baikal sculpins, and the closely related families that include the golomyanka. Most are small, typically less than 20 centimeters long, and they've adapted to life at every depth in the lake. Some live on rocky bottoms in shallow water, while others have colonized the deepest parts of the lake, where crushing pressure and perpetual darkness create one of Earth's most extreme freshwater environments. These deep water sculpins possess remarkable adaptations. Their bodies produce special compounds that stabilize their cell membranes and proteins under pressure. They can tolerate extreme cold, thriving in water that rarely rises above 5 degrees Celsius. Some species have reduced eyes or no functional eyes at all, as vision offers little advantage in the permanent darkness of the abyss. Instead, they rely on other senses, particularly their lateral line systems and sensitive barbels around their mouths, that detect vibrations and chemical traces in the water. Even the lake's microbial life tells a story of adaptation and diversity. The sediments at the bottom of Baikal support microbial densities, reaching millions of cells per gram of sediment. These aren't just ordinary bacteria. They belong to diverse groups, including proteobacteria, bacteroidetes, and acidobacteria, and many are involved in crucial biogeochemical cycles that keep the lake's ecosystem functioning. Near areas where water and gases seep up from the sediments, chemolithotrophic communities metabolize methane, ammonia, and sulfide, supporting deep water food webs even in complete darkness, where photosynthesis cannot occur. The lake is also home to at least 58 fish species, countless species of flatworms, snails, and other invertebrates, hundreds of species of diatom algae, and even unique species of sponges that grow in bright green masses due to symbiotic algae living in their tissues. In fact, it's estimated that roughly 2,600 species of plants and animals live in and around Lake Baikal, with new species still being discovered as scientists explore deeper and more remote parts of the lake. All of this diversity, all these strange and wonderful adaptations, evolved in isolation over millions of years. Lake Baikal is a living museum, a genetic library containing evolutionary solutions found nowhere else. And it serves as a reminder that even in the coldest, deepest, most isolated places, life finds ways not just to exist, but to flourish with creativity and abundance that astonishes anyone who takes the time to look beneath the surface. Halfway around the world from Siberia, nestled in the East African Rift Valley, lies another ancient deep lake with its own extraordinary collection of life. Lake Tanganyika stretches for 673 kilometers in a long, narrow basin bounded by steep mountains on all sides. At its deepest point, it plunges down 1,470 meters, making it the second deepest lake in the world after Baikal. It's also the longest freshwater lake on the planet and the second largest by volume, holding roughly 18,750 cubic kilometers of water. Like Baikal, Tanganyika formed in a tectonic rift zone where the Earth's crust is gradually pulling apart. The lake sits in the Albertine Rift, part of the larger East African Rift system, and it's been slowly filling with water for somewhere between 9 and 12 million years, though different basins within the lake formed at different times. The mountains surrounding it act like dam walls, catching the abundant tropical rainfall and funneling it into the lake, which derives about 90% of its water from rainfall, with the remainder coming primarily from the Ruzizi and Malagarasi rivers. But if Lake Baikal is a museum of isolation and adaptation, Lake Tanganyika is a living laboratory of explosive evolution, particularly when it comes to one group of fish, the cichlids. Tanganyika is home to at least 241 species of cichlid fish, and all but 2 of them are endemic, found nowhere else on Earth. To put that in perspective, imagine a single lake containing more unique fish species than exist in all the rivers and lakes of Europe combined. And these aren't just closely related species that look similar and behave the same way. Tanganyika's cichlids span an astonishing range of body shapes, sizes, colors, behaviors, and ecological roles, representing one of the most spectacular examples of adaptive radiation in the animal kingdom. Adaptive radiation is what happens when a single ancestral species rapidly diversifies into many different forms, each adapted to a specific ecological niche. In Tanganyika, cichlids have evolved into predators, herbivores, detritus feeders, planktivores, snail crushers, scale eaters, and even fish that raise their young in the mouths of their parents, keeping them safe until they're large enough to survive on their own. They range in size from species barely longer than a few centimeters to others exceeding 30 centimeters. Some have jaws specialized for scraping algae off rocks. Others have developed powerful crushing plates in their throats for breaking open snail shells. And still others have elongated bodies and jaws perfectly designed for ambushing smaller fish. The diversity isn't just morphological. Tanganyika's cichlids display an extraordinary range of coloration, from electric blues and brilliant yellows to deep reds and subtle browns, with patterns including stripes, spots, and iridescent scales that shimmer in the filtered sunlight of shallow water. Males of many species are dramatically more colorful than females, using their bright patterns to attract mates and establish territories on the rocky shores where most cichlids live. Some species have evolved elaborate courtship behaviors, with males building sandcastles or clearing circular pits on the lake bottom to impress females. Others guard territories aggressively, defending patches of rock where algae grows thick enough to feed their herbivorous young. Perhaps most remarkably, many cichlid species have evolved different trophic morphologies, meaning their body shapes and jaw structures are directly related to what they eat. Piscivorous species that hunt other fish tend to have longer, more streamlined bodies and elongated jaws filled with sharp teeth. Herbivorous species often have deeper, more compressed bodies that allow them to maneuver precisely among rocks, along with specialized teeth for scraping or grazing. Insectivorous species fall somewhere in between. Scientists have documented that the length of the intestine typically varies in the order of piscivores, having shorter intestines, then invertivores, then herbivores having the longest, directly reflecting how difficult their food is to digest. The evolutionary history of Tanganyika's cichlids is complex and still being unraveled. Scientists believe the radiation began about 5 to 6 million years ago, when the lake reached the deep water conditions that persist today. From an ancestral population, multiple lineages rapidly diversified, splitting into what are now recognized as 12 to 16 distinct tribes of cichlids. The monophily of each tribe, meaning each descended from a single common ancestor, is well supported by genetic evidence. But the relationships among the tribes remain difficult to resolve, suggesting that much of the diversification happened very rapidly in evolutionary terms, almost explosively. What makes this even more impressive is that many of these species continue to evolve and speciate today. Scientists have documented cases where populations of the same species living in different parts of the lake are diverging, developing subtle differences in coloration, behavior, or morphology that may eventually lead them to become separate species. The lake acts as an ongoing evolutionary experiment, and researchers can study speciation and adaptation happening in real time. But Tanganyika isn't just about cichlids. The lake harbors approximately 1,500 total species, with around 600 being endemic. Among the non-cichlid fishes are unique species of catfish, minnows, spiny eels, and an endemic species of clupaid, a sardine relative called the Tanganyika sardine, or ndagala, which swims in vast schools in the lake's pelagic zone and provides crucial protein for millions of people living around the lake's shores. There are also over 75 non-cichlid fish species, adding to the lake's incredible diversity. The invertebrate fauna is equally impressive. Tanganyika has endemic species of freshwater jellyfish, shrimp, crabs, snails, sponges, and numerous types of flatworms. Some of the crabs and shrimp have evolved to look remarkably similar to their marine relatives, having adapted independently to lake life. The snails have diversified into many forms, some with beautiful spiral shells that once made them popular among collectors, leading to over-harvesting of certain species. Yet beneath all this diversity lies a darker secret. Lake Tanganyika is what scientists call a meromictic lake, meaning its water column divides into distinct layers that don't mix. The surface waters, roughly the top 70 to 100 meters in the north and 200 to 250 meters in the south, are oxic, containing dissolved oxygen that supports the rich diversity of life we've been discussing. But below these depths, the lake becomes permanently anoxic, completely devoid of oxygen. Instead of oxygen, the deep waters contain high concentrations of toxic hydrogen sulfide, a chemical that would kill most aerobic organisms instantly. This anoxic zone is essentially lifeless, except for specialized bacteria capable of living without oxygen or even thriving on hydrogen sulfide. The stratification occurs because the lake is so deep and the water so stable that the bottom waters never mix with the surface. Temperature gradients and differences in water density keep the layers separate, and the lack of circulation means oxygen can never reach the depths through normal mixing. Any organic matter that sinks below the oxic zone falls into this dead zone, where it's slowly broken down by anaerobic bacteria in the sediments. This creates a compressed habitat for most of the lake's life. All the fish, the cichlids, the sardines, the invertebrates, they're all restricted to living in the upper portion of the water column. It's as if they're living on a platform suspended above an abyss they can never enter. The depth where oxygen disappears varies from north to south and can shift slightly with seasons and weather patterns. But it creates a hard boundary that concentrates life into a relatively thin layer compared to the lake's total depth. The rocky shores of Tanganyika particularly in the northern and central parts of the lake, represent the richest habitat. Here, where sunlight penetrates to depths of 20 to 50 meters, depending on water clarity, algae grows on the rocks, providing food for herbivorous cyclids. The complexity of the rocky terrain creates countless microhabitats, crevices, and caves where fish can hide from predators, territories to defend, and surfaces to graze. Scientists estimate that in some rocky shore areas, you might find 50 or more cichlid species coexisting in a space the size of a football field, each occupying a slightly different ecological niche, eating different foods, breeding at different times, or defending territories at different depths. The sandy and muddy bottoms of the lake support different communities. Here, cichlids that have adapted to open substrate dominate, including species that build elaborate castles and pits during breeding season, others that sift through sand searching for small invertebrates, and still others that hover just above the bottom, darting down to snatch prey. Some species have evolved the remarkable ability to change sex, transitioning from female to male or vice versa, depending on social circumstances within their group. A strategy that ensures breeding can continue even if dominant individuals are lost to predators. Lake Tanganyika faces numerous threats despite its richness. Overfishing, particularly of the sardine stocks and popular cichlid species, has depleted populations in many areas. Deforestation in the surrounding watershed leads to erosion, with sediment washing into the lake and smothering rocky habitats where cichlids breed. Climate change is altering the lake's circulation patterns and temperature structure, potentially expanding the anoxic zone and shrinking the habitable area. And the introduction of non-native species, whether deliberate or accidental, threatens to disrupt the intricate web of relationships that evolved over millions of years. Yet the lake persists as one of Earth's great wonders, a place where evolution's creativity is on full display, where ancient lineages continue to diversify, and where the story of life's adaptability is written in scales and fins and colours that dazzle the eye and humble the mind. If Lake Baikal is ancient and Lake Tanganyika is explosive, then Lake Vostok is alien, a world so extreme and so isolated that it challenges our very understanding of where and how life can exist. Lake Vostok lies beneath 4 kilometers of Antarctic ice, the largest subglacial lake on the planet, spanning an area of roughly 14,000 square kilometers and containing about 5,600 cubic kilometers of water. It's the 7th largest lake by volume and 4th deepest by mean depth on Earth. Yet, until the late 20th century, no one even knew it existed. The lake formed in a depression in the bedrock beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, and it's been sealed off from direct contact with the atmosphere for somewhere between 420,000 years to possibly 15 million years, depending on which scientific estimates you accept. The weight of the ice above creates enormous pressure, approximately 400 atmospheres at the lake surface. And this pressure, combined with a small amount of geothermal heat from the Earth's interior, keeps the water liquid despite temperatures hovering around -3 degrees Celsius. Without the ice cap, this would be far below freezing, but under such pressure, water remains liquid at temperatures that would turn it to ice at the surface. For decades after its discovery through ice-penetrating radar surveys, Lake Vostok remained untouched, a pristine environment locked away from the modern world. Scientists could only study it indirectly, drilling down through the ice to within meters of the lake surface, but stopping short of breaching it, concerned about contamination. What they discovered in the ice just above the lake, ice that had frozen to the glacier's bottom after being in contact with lake water, suggested something extraordinary. Microbial life, preserved in the frozen lake water. The first analyses of this accretion ice revealed low concentrations of bacterial cells, somewhere between 200 and 300 cells per milliliter, along with traces of nutrients and lipopolysaccharide, a biomarker for gram-negative bacteria. More remarkably, at least some of these microbes were viable, capable of respiring when provided with simple carbon compounds, even after thousands of years frozen in the ice. This suggested that the lake itself, sealed beneath kilometers of ice in near freezing temperatures, in complete darkness, under crushing pressure, might harbor living microorganisms. As scientists developed cleaner drilling methods and analyzed more ice samples, a picture began to emerge of the microbial diversity in Lake Vostok. The assemblage includes psychrophiles, organisms adapted to extreme cold, as well as psychrotolerant species that can survive cold even though they prefer slightly warmer temperatures. But surprisingly, the samples also contained DNA sequences most similar to thermophilic bacteria, organisms that thrive in hot environments. This puzzling discovery has led scientists to hypothesize that hydrothermal vents might exist at the bottom of Lake Vostok, similar to the black smoke events found in deep ocean trenches. If true, these vents would create pockets of warmer water where thermophiles could survive, deriving energy from chemical reactions rather than sunlight. The microbial communities appear to include representatives from major bacterial groups, including firmicutes, proteobacteria, actinobacteria, and bacteroidates. Analysis of genetic material suggests the presence of organisms capable of performing nitrogen fixation, nitrogen cycling, carbon fixation, and nutrient recycling, indicating a potentially complex ecosystem despite the extreme conditions. Some sequences matched closely to species from marine environments, including halophiles and halo-tolerant organisms, leading to speculation about the lake's history and whether it might once have been connected to the ocean during a period when Antarctica was warmer. One of the most remarkable findings was the discovery of unknown bacterial phylotypes, genetic sequences that don't match any known organisms in scientific databases. These unknown bacteria, if they indeed represent indigenous populations in Lake Vostok, could be species that evolved in isolation for hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, developing along entirely separate evolutionary pathways from life on the surface. They might possess unique biochemistry, unusual metabolic pathways, or novel adaptations to pressure and cold that could expand our understanding of life's possibilities. The lake's chemistry adds to its strangeness. The water contains extraordinarily high levels of dissolved oxygen, at least 320 milligrams per litre, far more than typical surface waters, and several times what's found in most lakes. This superoxygenation occurs because, as the glacier slowly moves across the lake over thousands of years, the immense pressure squeezes oxygen from the ice into the water below. For most organisms, such high oxygen concentrations would be toxic, creating reactive oxygen species that damage cells. Any life in Lake Vostok's water would need specialized mechanisms to cope with this highly oxidized environment, possibly using it to their advantage for metabolism, or developing protective enzymes to neutralize its harmful effects. The lake likely supports only a sparse population of microorganisms compared to most surface environments. Nutrient levels are low, with little organic matter available except what filters down from the ice, or is generated by chemolithotrophic bacteria capable of extracting energy from inorganic compounds. The complete absence of light eliminates photosynthesis entirely, so any ecosystem in the lake must be based on chemosynthesis, the process by which bacteria convert chemical energy from reactions involving hydrogen, methane, sulfur, or iron into organic compounds that can fuel food webs. Scientists estimate that Lake Vostok may contain somewhere around 2,000 species of microorganisms, based on genetic analyses of accretion ice samples, though this number remains highly uncertain and controversial. What's clear is that if life exists in the lake's water, it represents one of Earth's most extreme and isolated ecosystems, a community that has evolved independently from the rest of the biosphere for hundreds of thousands of years. The implications extend far beyond Earth. Lake Vostok is considered one of our best analogues for the subsurface oceans, thought to exist on several moons in our solar system, particularly Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, and Enceladus, a moon of Saturn. Both of these moons are covered by thick ice shells similar to Antarctica's ice sheet, and beneath that ice, scientists believe, lie vast oceans of liquid water. If microbial life can survive and even thrive in Lake Vostok's extreme conditions, sealed away from sunlight, surviving on chemical energy and whatever nutrients can be scraped from rock and ice, then similar life might exist in the dark waters of Europa or Enceladus. Studying Lake Vostok also pushes the boundaries of our technical capabilities. Drilling through 4 kilometers of ice without contaminating the pristine environment below requires extraordinary engineering and sterilization procedures. Scientists must use special drilling fluids, maintain cleanroom conditions, and develop methods to sample the lake water without introducing surface microbes that could overwhelm or permanently alter the native community. The Russian drilling team that first reached the lake in 2012 used methods that drew criticism for potential contamination, highlighting the delicate balance between scientific curiosity and environmental protection. More recent efforts have employed improved techniques, and in the coming years, scientists hope to deploy robotic submarines into Lake Vostok, vehicles that can explore the lake directly, taking photographs, measuring conditions throughout the water column, and collecting samples from different depths and locations. These missions, if they succeed, could finally answer questions that have tantalized researchers for decades. What truly lives in Lake Vostok? How complex can ecosystems become in such isolation? And what does this tell us about the potential for life in the universe? For now, Lake Vostok remains largely a mystery, a dark ocean beneath the ice, possibly teeming with microbes we've never seen before, possibly harboring secrets about evolution, adaptation, and the fundamental requirements for life itself. It's a reminder that even on our own planet, even in places we've explored and mapped and studied for centuries, there are still hidden worlds waiting to be discovered. Not all of the world's deepest lakes lie buried in ice or stretch across ancient rift valleys. Some were born in moments of catastrophic violence, and few demonstrate this more dramatically than Crater Lake in Oregon. 7,700 years ago, a massive stratovolcano called Mount Mazama erupted with such force that it emptied its magma chamber and collapsed in on itself, creating a caldera nearly 6 miles wide and more than half a mile deep. Over the following centuries, rain and snowmelt slowly filled this volcanic crater, creating a lake of extraordinary clarity and depth that now reaches down 594 meters at its deepest point, making it the deepest lake in the United States and the 9th deepest in the world. What makes Crater Lake unusual isn't just its violent origin or its depth. It's the lake's remarkable isolation. No rivers or streams flow into Crater Lake, and none flow out. The lake is fed entirely by rain and snow, which falls in abundance at this elevation in the Cascade Mountains. The park receives an average of 42 feet of snow annually, some of the highest snowfall totals in the continental United States. All of this precipitation, after it melts, drips into the lake, and the only water that leaves does so through evaporation, or by seeping slowly through porous volcanic rock in the caldera walls. This isolation creates water of startling purity, without inflowing streams carrying sediment, nutrients, or pollutants. Crater Lake's water is among the clearest in the world. On calm days, visibility can extend down to 40 meters or more, and the lake appears an almost unnatural shade of deep blue, a color that results from its great depth and the way pure water absorbs and scatters light. Looking down from the crater rim, visitors often describe the water as looking painted or artificial. So intense is its color, so sharp the contrast with the dark volcanic rock and white snow that surrounds it. Yet, despite this purity, or perhaps because of it, Crater Lake's ecosystem is remarkably simple compared to the ancient lakes we've explored. The lake is relatively young in geological terms, just 7,700 years old, barely a blink compared to Baikal's 25 million years, or Tanganyika's 9 million. This youth means life hasn't had time to evolve the extraordinary diversity seen in older lakes. In fact, until humans arrived, Crater Lake contained no fish at all. Between 1888 and 1941, park managers and visitors stocked the lake with 7 different species of fish, hoping to create recreational fishing opportunities. Only 2 species survived: rainbow trout and kokanee salmon, both introduced species that now reproduce in the lake. The rainbow trout are descendants of fish brought from a hatchery, and the kokanee, a landlocked form of sockeye salmon, found conditions suitable enough to establish a breeding population. These fish now occupy the top levels of the lake's food web, feeding on the invertebrates and smaller organisms that make up the lake's natural fauna. But there is one creature in Crater Lake that is endemic, found nowhere else in the world, and it has become the focal point of intense conservation concern. The Mazama newt is a subspecies of the rough-skinned newt, a common salamander found throughout the Pacific Northwest. The newts colonized Crater Lake roughly 6,000 years ago, after the lake had formed and conditions had stabilized. Cut off from other newt populations by the caldera's steep walls and the lack of streams connecting the lake to the outside world, the Crater Lake population evolved in isolation, developing distinctive characteristics that set it apart from its mainland relatives. The Mazama newt is darker than typical rough-skinned newts, with unusually dark ventral pigmentation on its belly, and genetic analyses have confirmed it's genetically distinct from other Pacific Northwest newt populations. More significantly, it has adapted to being the top aquatic predator in an environment where, until fish were introduced, it had no predators itself. As a result, Mazama newts produce far less tetrodotoxin, a potent neurotoxin that rough-skinned newts use as a defense against predators. While mainland newts can produce thousands of times more toxin, Mazama newts lost this chemical defense because they didn't need it. For thousands of years, this worked perfectly. The newts lived along the shoreline and in the shallows, feeding on snails, aquatic insect larvae, and other small invertebrates. Their populations regulated only by food availability and the harsh winter conditions. Then, in 1915, park managers introduced signal crayfish to the lake, hoping they would provide food for the newly stocked trout. The crayfish thrived beyond anyone's expectations. Signal crayfish are aggressive omnivores. They eat almost anything: algae, detritus, insects, small fish, and especially newts. As crayfish populations exploded in the warming waters of Crater Lake, driven by climate change that has raised the lake's surface temperature by more than 6 degrees Fahrenheit since 1965, they began spreading along the shoreline. Surveys show that crayfish now occupy approximately 80 to 95% of the lake's littoral zone, and they're projected to occupy 100% within just a few years. Where crayfish are abundant, newts are almost entirely absent. The two species compete for the same food sources, both being predators of benthic invertebrates. But more critically, crayfish actively prey on the newts. Without their toxin defense, Mazama newts are helpless against crayfish attacks. They can only try to hide or flee to the few remaining areas crayfish haven't yet colonized. As crayfish continue expanding, the newts are running out of refuges. Scientists predict that the Mazama newt could become extinct within the next decade or two if crayfish aren't controlled. The loss of the Mazama newt would represent more than just the extinction of one subspecies. It would be the loss of a unique genetic lineage that evolved over 6,000 years in isolation. A loss of biological diversity that can never be replaced. It would also disrupt the lake's ecosystem in ways that are difficult to predict. Before crayfish became dominant, newts were the primary predator of benthic invertebrates. Their decline has already been linked to changes in algae growth along the shoreline, though scientists are still working to understand all the cascading effects. Beyond the newts and introduced fish, Crater Lake's food web is built on a foundation of microscopic life. The lake contains hundreds of species of diatom algae, along with blue-green algae and green algae that form the base of the food chain, converting the sparse nutrients and abundant sunlight into organic matter. Primary consumers include water fleas, freshwater shrimp, copepods, snails, and the larvae of midges and other aquatic insects. These, in turn, are eaten by larger invertebrates like dragonfly nymphs and, increasingly, by crayfish and fish. In deeper waters, where light doesn't reach, scientists have found communities of yellow gold bacteria growing in vast, puffy mats on the lake bottom, along with various worms, insects, and tiny crustaceans able to withstand the intense water pressure. One particularly remarkable feature is the presence of Drepanocladus moss, which forms massive colonies and can grow in waters up to 140 meters deep, far deeper than most aquatic mosses. The rocky walls of the caldera, plunging nearly vertically from the lake's rim to depths of 100 to 400 meters, host hanging forests of moss that drape down like icicles in the dim underwater light. These vertical habitats provide surfaces for invertebrates to cling to and hiding places for fish creating a three-dimensional ecosystem very different from the flat bottoms typical of most lakes. Crater Lake faces an uncertain future. Climate change continues to warm the water, potentially expanding the range of invasive species while stressing the endemic newt population. The lake's famous clarity has begun to show signs of change, with algae blooms appearing in some years, coloring the shoreline waters with long strands of fluorescent green. Scientists are debating whether and how to intervene, whether it's possible or ethical to attempt removing the crayfish, and what responsibility humans have to protect the ecosystem we irrevocably altered when we introduced species that never belonged there. But even in its current compromised state, Crater Lake remains a place of extraordinary beauty and scientific interest. A window into how ecosystems form and evolve on relatively short timescales, and a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of human actions, however well-intentioned they might seem at the time. Across these diverse deep lakes, from Baikal's frigid expanses to Tanganyika's tropical waters, from Vostok's sealed darkness to Crater Lake's blue clarity, life has had to solve similar fundamental problems. How do you survive in crushing pressure? How do you see in near or total darkness? How do you find food when nutrients are scarce and photosynthesis is impossible? How do you reproduce when populations are sparse and finding mates is difficult? The solutions evolution has crafted are as varied as the lakes themselves. Pressure is perhaps the most obvious challenge. Every 10 meters of depth adds 1 atmosphere of pressure, meaning that at the bottom of Lake Baikal, organisms experience roughly 164 atmospheres of pressure pressing down on them from all sides. This is equivalent to having a weight of about 240 pounds pressing on every square centimetre of surface area. For comparison, the pressure in a car tyre is usually around 2 atmospheres. Most organisms would be crushed, or their cells would rupture under such conditions. But deep lake creatures have evolved multiple strategies to cope. One key adaptation involves the cell membranes. At high pressure, normal cell membranes can become too rigid, essentially freezing in place and losing the flexibility needed for nutrients to pass through. Deep living organisms compensate by incorporating more unsaturated fatty acids into their membranes, molecules that remain fluid even under pressure. It's like switching from butter to oil, keeping the membrane flexible and functional. Inside cells, proteins face similar challenges. Pressure can deform protein molecules, causing them to unfold or clump together, which destroys their ability to function. Deep lake organisms produce special osmolytes, small organic molecules that act as protein stabilizers, helping proteins maintain their correct 3-dimensional shapes, even when compressed. Some of these osmolytes, like trimethylamine N-oxide or TMAO, are found at concentrations that increase with depth, directly correlating with the pressure an organism experiences. Another pressure adaptation involves giving up certain features that don't work well in the deep. Many deep lake fish lack swim bladders, the gas-filled organs that help most fish control their buoyancy. A swim bladder would compress or expand dramatically with depth changes, making it more of a liability than an asset. The Golomyanka solved this by filling its body with oil instead, achieving neutral buoyancy without any gas-filled spaces that could rupture under pressure changes. Vision presents its own challenges in the deep. Light fades rapidly with depth. Even in the clearest water, most sunlight is absorbed or scattered in the first 100 meters. Blue and green light penetrate deepest, which is why many deep lake fish have vision shifted towards sensitivity to these wavelengths, while red light disappears almost immediately. Below about 200 meters, even in the clearest conditions, the light is so dim that vision becomes nearly useless. Many deep lake creatures have responded by enlarging their eyes, packing them with rod cells that are extraordinarily sensitive to low light levels. The Golomyanka's eyes, for instance, contain only rods and no cones, making them incredibly light sensitive, but unable to see color. Other species have gone the opposite direction, allowing their eyes to degenerate into vestigial structures or disappear entirely, since maintaining eyes costs energy and materials that could be better spent elsewhere when vision offers no advantage. To replace vision, deep lake animals rely heavily on other senses. The lateral line system, present in all fish and some amphibians, detects vibrations and pressure changes in the water, allowing them to sense movement of prey or predators, even in complete darkness. Touch-sensitive barbels around the mouth help fish locate food by direct contact. Some species may use chemical cues, following scent trails through the water, to find food or mates, though this remains difficult to study in wild populations. Metabolism also shifts in the deep. Cold temperatures and high pressure both tend to slow chemical reactions, which means deep lake organisms often have lower metabolic rates than their shallow water relatives. This can be advantageous, as it reduces their need for food in an environment where meals are scarce. However, it also means they grow more slowly, reproduce less frequently, and generally live life in a slower gear than surface-dwelling creatures. The abundance of amphipods in deep lakes, particularly Baikal's giant forms, seems to contradict this trend towards smaller sizes and slower metabolism in the deep. Scientists believe this is explained by Baikal's unusual feature of maintaining high oxygen levels throughout its entire depth. Oxygen is often the limiting factor in deep water, and when it's abundant, it can support larger body sizes and more active lifestyles than would otherwise be possible at those depths. Reproduction in deep lakes presents unique challenges. Finding mates is difficult when populations are sparse and visibility is low. Many deep lake fish have evolved to be less selective, mating with whoever they encounter, or producing enormous numbers of offspring to compensate for the low probability any given individual will survive to adulthood and find a mate. The Golomyanka's strategy of giving birth to thousands of live young at once is one extreme example. Some deep lake cichlids use a different strategy, mouth brooding. Females carry fertilized eggs in their mouths for weeks, protecting them from predators and ensuring high survival rates for the offspring that do hatch. The female can't eat during this period, living off stored energy reserves, but the trade-off means her offspring have much better chances of survival than eggs left unguarded in an environment full of egg predators. Even body composition changes with depth. Fish living in the deep often have less dense bones, with more cartilage, reducing their overall density to make maintaining position in the water column less energetically costly. Some have watery, gelatinous flesh rather than firm muscle, again reducing density. The Golomyanka takes this to an extreme, with its oil-filled body and minimal skeleton, making it almost weightless in water. These adaptations don't evolve in isolation. They're part of integrated systems where changes in one feature cascade through an organism's entire biology. Evolution in deep lakes has produced not just individual traits, but entire body plans optimized for life in conditions that would kill most other organisms. And these solutions, arrived at independently in different lakes around the world, represent parallel evolution, nature arriving at similar answers to similar problems through separate evolutionary pathways. In the darkness and pressure of deep lakes, where photosynthesis cannot occur, and where plant life exists only in the shallowest surface waters, food webs must operate on fundamentally different principles than those in sunlit environments. Understanding how energy flows through these systems reveals the ingenuity of life's solutions to the challenge of eating and being eaten in the deep. At the foundation of most deep lake food webs sit not plants, but bacteria, chemosynthetic bacteria capable of extracting energy from inorganic chemical reactions, form the base of the pyramid in the darkest depths. These microbes can metabolize methane seeping from lake sediments, oxidize hydrogen sulfide released from decaying organic matter, or process ammonia and other nitrogen compounds. In doing so, they convert chemical energy into organic matter, creating the first link in the food chain without any input from sunlight. These bacteria don't produce as much biomass as photosynthetic organisms would, which is why deep lake ecosystems are generally less productive than shallow ones. But they create enough to support communities of bacteria-feeding organisms, mostly tiny single-celled creatures, and small invertebrates that graze on bacterial films growing on sediments and surfaces. In lakes like Tanganyika, where an anoxic zone divides the lake into oxygenated surface and oxygenless depths, chemosynthetic bacteria concentrate near the boundary between these zones. Here, they access both the chemicals rising from below and the oxygen descending from above, creating hotspots of microbial productivity that attract larger organisms. But most energy in deep lakes doesn't start in the depths. It falls from above, in the form of dead organisms, fecal pellets, and bits of organic matter that sink slowly through the water column, a phenomenon scientists call marine snow. Though the same process occurs in fresh water, this detritus becomes food for scavengers and filter feeders living at all depths. Amphipods play a crucial role here, particularly in Lake Baikal, where they've diversified into hundreds of species filling different feeding niches. Some amphipod species are detritivores, consuming dead organic matter as it settles. Others are omnivores, eating both living and dead material. Still, others are specialized predators, hunting smaller invertebrates, or even parasitizing other amphipods. This diversity means amphipods can efficiently harvest energy at multiple levels of the food web, from decomposers to top predators among the invertebrates. These amphipods, in turn, become food for fish. In Baikal, the sculpins and golomyanka rely heavily on amphipods, with some species like the deep water sculpins feeding almost exclusively on them. The golomyanka perform daily vertical migrations, rising toward the surface at night to feed on planktonic amphipods and copepods in the middle depths, then descending back to deeper water during daylight hours, possibly to avoid the few visual predators that might hunt them in clearer, brighter water. This vertical migration is common in deep lakes. Many small animals rise toward the surface at night when it's safer from visual predators to feed on the rich plankton communities that thrive in sunlit water during the day. Then they descend back to depth before dawn. This migration transfers enormous amounts of energy from surface to deep as the animals carry the nutrients they consumed back down with them, either through their own movements or eventually through their death and decomposition. The Baikal seal sits at the top of this food pyramid, consuming vast quantities of golomyanka and amphipods. An adult seal can eat several kilograms of fish per day, and with a population of 80,000 to 100,000 seals, they remove an enormous amount of biomass from the lake annually. Yet the system remains in balance, with golomyanka populations producing enough offspring each year to replace what's eaten and amphipods reproducing fast enough to sustain both fish and seal populations. In Lake Tanganyika, the food web looks somewhat different, shaped by the lake's stratification and the dominance of dicklids. Algae growing on rocky surfaces near shore capture sunlight and convert it to organic matter, forming the base of the food web in the oxic zone. Herbivorous cichlids graze this algae, scraping it off rocks with specialized teeth or nibbling at algae-covered surfaces. These herbivores become prey for piscivorous cichlids, which hunt in the rocky shallows or over open sand. The pelagic zone, the open water away from shore, has its own food web centered on zooplankton and small fish, like the Tanganyika sardine. These sardines form the basis of the lake's most important commercial fishery, feeding millions of people around the lake's shores. They eat zooplankton and are in turn eaten by larger predatory fish and birds. Even in Crater Lake's simplified ecosystem, the same basic pattern holds. Algae and other microscopic organisms photosynthesize in the surface waters, creating organic matter that feeds zooplankton. Small invertebrates eat the zooplankton or graze on benthic algae. These invertebrates are consumed by larger invertebrates, fish and newts, though the introduction of crayfish has disrupted this web by creating a super-efficient predator that outcompetes native species and preys on the endemic newt. Throughout all these systems, decomposers play a crucial but often overlooked role. Bacteria and fungi break down dead organisms and waste products, recycling nutrients back into forms that can be used by primary producers. Without decomposers, dead organic matter would accumulate, locking up nutrients in forms unavailable to living organisms, and the entire system would gradually run down and collapse. The efficiency of these deep lake food webs depends on maintaining the delicate balance between production and consumption at each level. Too many predators and prey populations crash. Too few and lower trophic levels explode, potentially depleting nutrients or creating harmful algal blooms. The ancient lakes, having had millions of years to fine-tune these relationships, generally maintain stable balances, though human impacts are testing these systems' resilience. Yet despite millions of years of stability, despite the seeming permanence of these ancient lakes and their ecosystems, they face an uncertain future. The threats are many, varied, and increasingly severe, challenging our ability to protect places that have remained largely unchanged for longer than our species has existed. Climate change affects every deep lake, though the impacts vary. In Lake Baikal, warming air temperatures are reducing the duration and thickness of winter ice cover. This has cascading effects throughout the ecosystem. Seals depend on stable ice for giving birth to pups, and shorter ice seasons may reduce breeding success. The change in ice cover also affects water circulation patterns, potentially impacting the convection processes that keep oxygen levels high throughout the water column. Warming water temperatures favor certain species over others. Invasive species introduced to Baikal, like the Elidea canadensis water plant, spread more aggressively in warmer conditions. Native species adapted to cold water may struggle as temperatures rise, potentially leading to shifts in community composition that cascade through the food web. In Crater Lake, warming has already had dramatic impacts. The lake's surface temperature has increased by more than 6 degrees Fahrenheit since 1965, with July 2021 setting a record monthly average of 63 degrees. This warming has enabled signal crayfish to expand their range much faster than would have been possible in colder water, directly contributing to the decline of the Mazama newt. Warmer water also promotes algae growth, reducing the lake's famous clarity and potentially altering the entire character of the ecosystem. For Lake Vostok, climate change poses different risks. While the thick ice cap insulates the lake from direct warming, changes in Antarctica's ice sheets could alter the pressure or the rate at which the glacier moves across the lake, potentially disrupting the delicate conditions that allow life to persist there. More immediately, climate change affects our ability to study the lake, as warming makes drilling operations and equipment deployment more challenging. Invasive species represent another major threat. In Tanganyika, introduced water hyacinth plants have spread across parts of the lake, clogging shorelines and altering habitats. The Nile perch, a voracious predator introduced to Lake Victoria with catastrophic results, has not yet reached Tanganyika, but scientists worry about what would happen if it did. In Baikal, several invasive species have established populations, though none have yet caused ecosystem-wide disruption. Overfishing threatens the productive fisheries that millions of people depend on. Lake Tanganyika's sardine fisheries have been declining, though it's unclear whether this is due to overharvesting, climate change, or other factors. The endemic cichlids face additional pressure from collection for the aquarium trade, with some rare species being taken faster than they can reproduce. Regulations exist but are difficult to enforce across 4 countries and thousands of kilometers of shoreline. Pollution is a growing concern, particularly in Baikal, where industrial facilities on the lake's shores have released toxic waste into the water. More than 15,000 metric tons of toxic waste have flowed into the lake since 2010, according to environmental monitoring groups. This pollution has been linked to the death of endemic sponges in some areas, and the growth of putrid algae blooms that were unknown in the lake until recent decades. Sedimentation from deforestation and poor agricultural practices affects all the lakes to varying degrees. In Tanganyika, erosion from cleared hillsides washes sediment into the lake, smothering rocky habitats where cichlids breed and reducing water clarity. This sediment also carries nutrients that can trigger algae blooms, further degrading habitat quality. Perhaps most fundamentally, these lakes face the challenge that what makes them special, their age, their isolation, their unique fauna, also makes them irreplaceable and extremely vulnerable. When a species goes extinct in a normal lake or river system, related species from nearby waters might eventually recolonize. But in deep, isolated lakes like Baikal or Tanganyika, each endemic species represents millions of years of independent evolution. When it's gone forever, and nothing can replace it. Conservation efforts are underway in all these lakes, though with varying degrees of success. Lake Baikal was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1996. providing some level of protection and international recognition of its importance. Tanganyika has been the focus of regional cooperation among the 4 countries that share its waters, with programs aimed at sustainable fishing, watershed management, and biodiversity protection. Crater Lake benefits from being entirely within a national park, though even this level of protection hasn't prevented the crisis facing the Mazama newt. Scientists continue pushing for better protections, more research funding, and stronger enforcement of existing regulations. They argue that these lakes are not just local or national treasures, but global heritage sites, repositories of biodiversity and evolutionary history that belong to all humanity. Yet protecting them requires balancing conservation with the needs of millions of people who depend on these lakes for water, food, and livelihoods. The future of the world's deepest lakes will depend on choices we make now. Will we act aggressively to control invasive species, even when it's expensive and difficult? Will we limit fishing enough to allow depleted populations to recover? Will we transition away from fossil fuels fast enough to slow the warming that's already affecting these systems? Will we invest in the monitoring and research needed to understand what's happening and respond effectively? These aren't easy questions, and the answers involve trade-offs between competing values and interests. But what's clear is that inaction has costs too, and those costs include the potential loss of some of the most extraordinary ecosystems on our planet. As we surface from our journey through these hidden depths, returning from the crushing pressure and perpetual darkness to the familiar world of air and light, it's worth pausing to reflect on what these lakes reveal about life and our relationship with it. These deep lakes are time machines, preserving forms of life that evolved millions of years ago in conditions that have remained essentially stable for longer than we can easily comprehend. They're evolutionary laboratories, places where we can watch speciation and adaptation happening, where a single ancestral fish can diversify into hundreds of species, each a slightly different solution to the problem of existence. They're treasure chests of biodiversity, harboring creatures found nowhere else, genetic libraries that could someday yield insights into everything, from pressure tolerance to longevity to the biochemistry of extreme environments. But they're also fragile, more fragile than their ancient origins might suggest. An ecosystem that took millions of years to develop can unravel in decades or less when subjected to new pressures it never evolved to handle. The introduction of a single invasive species, the warming of water by a few degrees, the addition of too many nutrients or too much sediment, any of these can trigger changes that cascade through the entire system, altering it beyond recognition. What happens in these lakes matters beyond their borders. They hold a significant percentage of Earth's fresh water, water that billions of people downstream might someday need. They support fisheries that feed millions. They regulate local climates and weather patterns. And perhaps, most importantly, they remind us that Earth still holds mysteries, still contains places we barely understand, still harbors life forms we've never properly studied. The deepest lakes call us to humility. They whisper that despite our technology and knowledge, despite our ability to drill through kilometers of ice or map the lake floor with sonar, we still have so much to learn. Every research expedition discovers new species, new relationships, new processes we didn't know existed. How much more remains hidden in depths we haven't yet reached? They also call us to responsibility. We are the first human generation with both the knowledge to understand these ecosystems and the power to destroy them. That's not a burden our ancestors carried, and future generations won't have the chance to reverse our mistakes if we make the wrong choices now. The Mazama newt could be saved if we're willing to make the effort. Baikal's endemic species could persist for millions more years if we stop pollution and manage climate change. Tanganyika's spectacular cichlid diversity could continue to dazzle and evolve if we fish sustainably and protect habitats. These outcomes are still possible. We haven't passed the point of no return, but the window for action is closing, and what we do in the next decade or two will likely determine what these lakes look like a century from now, a millennium from now, a million years from now. So, perhaps the deepest lesson from the deepest lakes is this: we are connected to places we will never visit, to creatures we will never see, to processes that operate on timescales beyond our individual lives. What happens in the cold darkness at the bottom of Lake Baikal matters. What lies beneath 4 kilometers of Antarctic ice matters. The fate of a small dark newt in a crater lake in Oregon matters. Not just because these things are useful to us, though they may be. Not just because they're beautiful, though they certainly are. But because they exist, because they're part of the living tapestry of Earth. And because in protecting them, we protect something essential about what it means to be human, our capacity for wonder, our ability to value life for its own sake, our recognition that we're part of something larger than ourselves. As you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine those depths still working their quiet magic. The Baikal seal is diving through cold darkness, following the lateral line signatures of translucent fish. Tanganyika's cichlids are defending their territories among ancient rocks, their colours flashing in filtered light. Bacteria in Lake Vostok are slowly metabolizing chemicals in eternal night. And somewhere in Crater Lake, a small dark newt is hiding among the rocks, part of a lineage 6,000 years in the making, hoping to see another dawn. These worlds exist whether we think about them or not, pursuing their ancient patterns, maintaining balances refined over millions of years. They've survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions, droughts and floods. They've adapted to changing climates before, but they've never faced anything quite like us, a species capable of altering entire ecosystems in a generation, of spreading across the globe and connecting previously isolated places. The question is whether we can learn to be custodians rather than conquerors, whether we can apply our remarkable intelligence and technology not just to understanding these places, but to protecting them, whether we can make room for mystery and wildness and diversity, even as our own population grows and our needs expand. The deepest lakes, in their silent depths, are waiting to see what we'll choose. If you've enjoyed this journey to the hidden worlds beneath our planet's surface, please consider subscribing to Bedtime Biology and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us continue exploring the quiet wonders of nature, one calming, curious topic at a time. Until next time, sleep well, and remember that Earth still holds secrets worth protecting.